about woodland creation on your farm. A little bit about myself to start with. I'm Ewan Parry. I'm a chartered forester. My current role is area manager for South Wales and the Marches with Till Hill Forestry. I've been in forestry now for forestry and timber for well over 25 years. Currently responsible for the South Wales area, which stretches pretty much across from Aberystwyth across to the Marches and then down and covers the whole of South Wales. And within that region, we manage in the region around about 8,000 hectares of forest of all types. Of the 8,000 hectares, all types of woodlands, both conifer and broadleaves, and new plantations. So it's a complete mix, but emphasis probably is on the commercial side. Just to give you a flavour of what we do in terms of Till Hill, we planted in the region of 2 million trees in Wales last year, so we're very accustomed to delivering plenty of tree planting. In Wales, we have good spread of managers. We've got 40 managers across the whole of the country, and the majority of our managers are Gloucester and Woodland agent planners. Right, woodland creation always springs lots of questions for the landowner and for people who potentially want to invest in woodlands and so on, but particularly in terms of the landowner and farmers, which is what we're concentrating on tonight. Why, what, where and when. Lots of questions: why you should do it, where you should do it, what and how, and so on. So what I'm going to try and do tonight is to run through the benefits of woodland creation, but also to be quite practical in terms of the process and potential benefits, and also the grant scheme which runs alongside. So first of all, in terms of woodland creation, why would you consider planting woodland on the farm? Well, I think we live in times of change in terms of Brexit and all that's going on in the world at the moment. There's lots of uncertainty, and it's a way of diversifying your farm income through grants and through product, which of course is timber. So it's an opportunity to look at the whole farm and to decide whether or not woodland is appropriate to your business. It can provide shelter, and there are many schemes across the country where farmers have planted large and small areas for shelter, and that has been proven over the years to increase farm yields. It's an opportunity also for people who want to scale down their farming without selling the land that they've owned for time. It's an opportunity to put part of the farm into woodland, which can generate income, both annual income and long-term investment, maintaining tax liability in terms of inheritance tax that you would get through farming, and there are benefits through forestry as well. So that's something that is worth looking into. But it just gives you the opportunity to maybe scale down the farming but retain the holding. Something which is really new in the marketplace, I think, is carbon. Some of you will have heard of the ability to sell carbon. This is a very new marketplace, and it's an emerging market which is starting to gather some pace, and that's something we'll talk about. In terms of products, then obviously biomass is something which has become more popular in terms of fuel. There's lots more biomass systems on the market these days, and therefore the product and the demand for biomass is increasing. And also timber for construction. Timber is becoming known as a sustainable construction material, and there's no doubt that in the future that's going to become a bigger marketplace, and it's going to be, the demand is increasing. And the third one is obviously the carbon. Increases in biodiversity value for your farm. So as a whole, if your farm is rich in biodiversity, then obviously it's a very healthy place for all that it sustains and everything that it produces. Woodlands can provide opportunities for sporting activities, both on small scale and larger scales. There are very successful shoots in the countryside, and planting woodlands in a strategic manner can provide that opportunity. And last of all, flooding and soil erosion can be a big problem for some properties, and there's no doubt that strategic planting of woodland can help with that. In terms of the support that's available, then many of you will be aware of the scheme Glastir Woodland Creation, and the scheme currently available is broken into 4 main categories, and the first one is enhanced mixed woodland, where you're planting a minimum of 5 species. You're planting at high density, 2,500 trees per hectare. The grant rate is £3,600 per hectare, and these tend to be the more commercial woodlands, but at nowhere near the some have criticised over the years that the monocultures that have been planted in the countryside of single species and so on. These enhanced mixed woodlands are, as I state, really have minimum of 5 different species, minimum of 25% broadleaves, and very diverse woodlands, but also very commercial in their productive cycle. The second one is native carbon, native woodland carbon. Again, 2,500 trees per hectare. Grant is higher, 4,500. Probably worth noting that the grants really reflect the costs, and the higher grant is there to pay for the higher costs compared to the enhanced mixed woodland. Planting natives and getting natives established is more costly, and this is why the grant rate is higher. Native woodland biodiversity is the third category, slightly lower grant rate, but the number of trees per hectare is 1,600, and therefore less trees, less costs. Generally planted with biodiversity as the main objective, so it's a lower density planting, but again offers something for those who are those people who have biodiversity as the main objective. And then the third one is agroforestry, with scattered trees. You maintain grazing and so on within the area, lower density planting, and £1,600 per hectare is the grant rate. On top of the capital grant, so these are the grants for establishing the woodland in the first place. In addition to that, there is a maintenance payment, which is paid for the first 12 years. And that's £60 per hectare for the first 3 categories, and agroforestry it's £30 per hectare. And the payments for the agroforestry are for 5 years as opposed to the 12 years. So that's worth noting. And then on top of that, you've got your woodland creation premium of £350 per hectare. So if you're planting your enhanced mixed woodland, you're going to get £410 per hectare per year for 12 years, and the same with the native carbon and biodiversity. Any fencing requirements is paid at the standard Glastir rate of £3.48, which under current prices obviously is a contribution towards cost. So what I've done to try and give you a flavour as to the process and to give you a flavour of woodland creation is to base it around a case study, a scheme that's been done has achieved its objectives and is delivered through the Glastonbury process. And it's a scheme that we Till Hill have been successful in delivering. Right, so what I'm going to talk about is the profile of the farm to start with. So the case study is a 500-acre hill farm, which would be common to many people. 200 acres of it is improved grassland, 300 acres of it is unimproved hill land. The farm is organic and the land rises up to 1,750 feet at its highest point. It's got 15 acres of woodland, 600 improved Welsh ewes, 140 replacement ewe lambs, and it's run by a young family who have now recently taken over from the parents who still live on the farm. And the young family have 3 young children, and yeah, it's fairly typical of a profile of a Welsh farm. So that's the background. Here's a taster of the type of ground that the farm encompasses. It's a mixture of improved grassland, as we stated, and some unimproved areas, which is on the hill. Areas areas which are vegetated up with bracken and gorse, and also other areas which are better land. So it just gives you a flavour of what the land was looking like before we undertook the evaluation and the submission for the grant. So I just wanted to sort of give you that as a bit of background in terms of type of land. It's both flat and very steep, so different types of land in terms of its so the proposal was to plant up 120 acres, to plant a mixed woodland under the enhanced mixed woodland grant of 75% conifer and 25% broadleaf. The objective was to maximise the productive area of coniferous species, whilst also having the 25% broadleaves, which was still a significant area. We were going to apply for a Glastonbury grant to try and get grant support, and it was decided, it was looked upon as a long-term investment for the farm, and something that was seen as maintaining the farm as a productive area, but also at the same time diversifying into something new, which was going to provide income for the first 12 years before the timber was ready for harvesting. So the annual income we were estimating it was going to be in the region of £20,000, and also worth noting was that the owners they did not really want to get too involved in the work itself. They wanted to put the work in the hands of the professionals, and they were asking ourselves as Till Hill to act on their behalf in the first instance, applying for the grants, advising on the type of planting and so on, and following that to manage if it was successful. And the other aspect was no establishment costs, as the grant paid for all the work. So it was estimated in the first instance that the grants were going to be sufficient to establish the woodland. And as I mentioned, 100% of the scheme is to be managed by Till Hill. So we started out in the initial period was to work with the farmer and to decide which areas were to be planted. A process of really, obviously you as farmers will know your land better than anyone, and you will have ideas as to the type of land, the areas of land that you wish to put into the scheme. And this was the case really, and the owners here wanted to, had a good idea, but also took some advice in terms of which areas they were going to put into the scheme. So the first step really is to express an interest, so to submit an expression of interest for the Woodland Creation scheme. And something to note is that today rules are different to what they were then, in that an agent planner must submit the application. If the owner themselves do submit the application, then the application will be rejected. Following this, the next process really is when you, following the expression of interest, we had to wait about 6 months while all the schemes were given a score, and eventually we were fortunate to be told that the expression of interest was approved, which allows us to go to the second stage. And the second stage is really for the agent planner to work with the landowner to develop a scheme which is going to be successful. Stage 2 really is the start of the planning stage, where the management planner, the agent planner, starts the real work of developing the plan and the project itself. And this requires quite extensive consultation, as all the glass tier schemes need to meet the UK Forest Standard. And that's the standard which is set to ensure that all planting schemes take due consideration while they're being developed of the environment and the people within the environment and so on. So the types of considerations that need to be looked at are, whether or not the land is within a acid-sensitive water body, whether it's got priority habitats. The neighbours need to be consulted. Is there open access? Is the land designated? Do we have private water supplies? Where are the utilities? Is it common land? Is it within a historic landscape? Does it have deep peat? There's lots and lots of considerations. And on the face of it, a glass tier scheme looks fairly straightforward, but it's critical that all these considerations are taken into account when developing the scheme, and this is what the agent planner will do for you as a landowner. That process took around about 2 months to receive all the replies and feed them into the plan, and at that stage, obviously, we need to ensure that the plan has taken full account of these aspects, and that the area planted is in line with the guidelines that we work to. In terms of this particular scheme, we needed to consult regarding open access, so there was some priority habitat and public rights of ways, along with some historic environment features. And following the consultation process, we did have to take an area probably of around about 2 hectares out of the scheme due to priority habitat, and to ensure that the scheme was compliant.
Apologies, Johan, I'll just cut in there. Can I ask you all to switch your microphones off, please? There's a background noise coming through, so I think it's a bit difficult to hear for some people. If I can ask you all just to put your microphones on mute. Diolch yn fawr. Thanks, Johan.
Okay. Right, so stage 3 really is the planting design, and critically what's important here is that we plant the right tree in the right place. This is probably something you hear a lot about, and is absolutely critical to the success of the scheme. It's important that you do seek proper advice with regards to this, and at the end of the day, you're investing in something which is long term, and you need to ensure that you're getting the correct advice. So in terms of this part of the process, in terms of this scheme, we mapped out the site in detail, and maps are critically important. Proper GIS maps are critically important to development of the scheme, to make sure that the areas are accurate and in line with what's expected and what Welsh Government want. Survey the ground vegetation and the ground itself to decide on species what to plant and where, as I've said, but also on types of, ground preparation techniques. Preparing the ground critically is very important if you want to, have a successful planting scheme, whether it's small or large. It's so important that you get the ground preparation correct to get the trees away quickly and efficiently. Often you do see people trying to save money on ground preparation techniques, and it does tend to cost them down the line with slower and poorer establishments. Survey of fencing requirements. It's critical that the areas within the schemes are stock excluded. It's a requirement of the scheme in terms of last year, but also in terms of the success of the plants, the trees growing in their early days, to ensure that the area is stock proof, and therefore you need to make sure that the survey of the fencing is accurate, as you will need to input that into the plan. And then obviously considerations of any threats, whether it deer, rabbits, voles, etc. You just need to take account of that and decide whether or not the trees need guarding, or whether there's any control that is required to ensure that, again, that the scheme is successful. And also you need to make sure that to plant it and to look after it as efficient as possible, that access to the site is suitable. So in terms of our scheme here that we spoke about, the case study, we ended up with a 48-hectare enhanced mixed woodland. It was made up of 50% sick spruce, 15% Douglas fir, 10% Norway spruce, 15% birch, and 10% alder. Now, this is just one example, and obviously there are many other species which can be chosen, and critically ensuring that the right tree in the right place is the most important. The requirement for the Glasgow scheme is 2,500 trees per hectare, but we have planted in this scheme, as we do with many commercial schemes, at 2,700 trees per hectare for the coniferous species, and 2,500 trees per hectare for the broadleaves, just to enable trees to grow at their optimum. We did encounter some rabbit damage early on after planting, and there was no guarding in the initial plan, but we had, within the cash flow that we presented to the clients, we had included protection of a percentage of the site, and we did need to guard particular areas where we had some rabbit problems, and that cost was only borne once that threat was seen to establish. In terms of the ground preparation of the site, it was a mix of ploughing, mounding, and direct planting, according to the ground type. So where we had the better soils, on the extreme steep slopes, we direct planted. Where the better slopes, better soils on the flatter ground, we mounded, and ploughing down the bottom where drainage needed to be improved. The fencing requirement for the site was 2,200 metres, so there was new fencing there, and in all the capital grant was 180,000, and the annual payments was just under £20,000 a year. So that gives you a flavour as to what the scheme entailed. Now, once you've got to that part of the process, you've got the agreement, you've got the contract on the table, then it's a time to sign the contract and to start planning, undertaking the work itself. So you've done all the preparation, you've prepared your plan, you've got your scheme in place, it's all mapped. Now the hard work begins, and again, this part of the process we undertook on behalf of the client as Till Hill, and we delivered an extremely successful scheme, which is today growing well and being very, very very successful. But to do that entails quite a lot of planning in terms of the implementation side. You know, we need to decide on the timings of all the operations, what type of trees to buy in terms of specification, and there are many different types of trees. Even of certain species, you can buy different types of trees. There are improved types, different growth rates, different form, and these are all considerations where you need to take, you know, professional advice really. We need to decide on protection, the fencing, the ground preparation. That all needs to be decided upon. What weed control we're going to undertake, who was going to do the work, the contractors, the timings, were we going to meet the deadlines, and ordering all those materials in advance, and ensuring that the trees are available. Now, this is probably something that's worth noting. In more recent times, we are now finding that, particularly because of the success of planting schemes in Scotland, that the availability of trees is now becoming more difficult. The tree nurseries are trying to build up stocks, but obviously, you know, they will be selling their stocks fairly early on, and there is great demand for these trees now. So it's extremely important that you know, the planning is in place. Working with larger forestry companies, obviously, you get the advantage of the purchasing of stock, and we as a company work with our tree nursery quite closely to ensure stock for planting schemes. So initially we did the fencing work, claimed the grants on that, and then obviously the ground preparation, any pre-planting weed control requirements, any vegetation clearance needs to be done in advance of planting, and then obviously the planting operation itself. And we're planting tens, if not hundreds of thousands of trees in one scheme. It takes a lot of organising, lots of trees to be delivered and manoeuvred around sites and so on, and ensuring that the quality of planting is extremely important, and how the contractors are treating the trees, and all the little details that maybe lots of people don't realise make a huge difference to the success and success of the scheme, but also the growth of the trees. And then obviously we need to think about the aftercare. So once the plants are in the ground and they start to grow, we can't just walk away and hope that they will grow. These trees need aftercare. They need to be, weeds need to be controlled, checks need to be made. Trees which die, and you are going to get an element of mortality, needs to be replaced. You need to ensure that the glaster stocking densities are in place and maintained, so that's when they're inspected at the right rate. And then obviously dealing with any problems which are encountered, frost damage or any other issues with regards to the trees, that needs to be managed along the way, and to ensure that your scheme is successful. And then from years, I suppose, the aftercare for the first 2 or 3, 4 years is critical, and then ongoing management in terms of checks, management, health of the trees is critical to the success of your potential project. So here's some of the ground techniques where we did some shallow ploughing in advance of the planting. Same here. So the ground was ploughed in this scenario. So it's just some photos really to give you a bit of scale of what took place. In the foreground here, we can see some mounding, which is a different technique. And as I said previously, the ground preparation is critically important for the success of the projects. There's a photo here which is straight after ground preparation, and that's the same area, going backwards and forwards, the same area in 3 years' time, with the trees establishing at extremely good densities, which is great to see. So the project is starting to take hold. It's still in its establishment phase, but the establishment is extremely good, and it will no doubt be a great asset to the landowner, and will produce, and is already showing great growth in terms of its productivity, its value in terms of wildlife. There's lots. The broadleaf areas are already colonising with particular wildlife, but also the coniferous areas, and they are supporting lots of different types. And it mustn't be discounted. We often hear about the importance of broadleaves, but it's mixed woodlands, I think, which are going to be robust for the future, and are going to sustain a diverse environment. Some of the broadleaves here, which were planted particularly around the watercourses to provide buffers and so on. So here we see some of the early growth, which in 3 years, some considerable growth in terms of these Sitka spruce. They are an improved type, and I think what we're planting these days are far supreme to what was planted in the old rotations, and the tree breeding that's gone on not only in Sitka spruce but in both conifers and broadleaf is producing some really great results, and is very encouraging. So for the landowner, you can see initial growth rates being very good. So in conclusion, with regards to the case study, the new woodland is now pretty much established. We as Till Hill have managed the woodland for the owner and the process all the way through the grant system, ensuring that all the regulations and the guidance is met. The trees are growing very well, as you can see. The owner is receiving just shy on £20,000 a year. He doesn't spend too much time managing this part of the farm himself. He's busy farming and also working elsewhere, and he depends on ourselves to deliver the management of the forest elements of the farm. The woodland itself is soaking up lots of carbon from the atmosphere, and there's potential there. As I said, colonising in terms of wildlife and plants, and the plan currently is to look to develop a scheme to sell carbon from the woodland. As I previously said, it's a very young market. It's something which we are starting to get into, and it's an opportunity for people who are considering woodland creation. It's something very, very much worthwhile. So woodlands can add value to your farm business. My advice is it's important that you talk to the experts. You ensure that you get a full cash flow prepared in advance, so that you can see the financial profile of the decision that you're going to make. And it's a business decision, and therefore you need to ensure that you're getting professional advice. As chair of the ICF in Wales, I'd advise you to look to employ a chartered forester, who are obviously have met particular standards in terms of their work, and uphold the standards of the Institute, which is important, which gives you the confidence in what advice they're giving you. Forestry is a sound investment with great returns. There are reports out there which you can look at, the forest market report and so on, that you can look to see how forests are performing. Obviously, there are different financial profile to farming, and you're not getting the yearly necessarily yearly cash income. It's a longer term investment, but it is a very sound investment, and forestry is considered very low risk. There are great opportunities for utilising woodlands in different forms, not only in terms of timber production, but also amenity developments and so on. Yeah, as I mentioned before, some of the other benefits. And demand for timber and carbon will only increase. I've no doubt about that. It's an extremely bright future, and one which you as farmers should consider. But it won't meet everyone's needs, and I can fully appreciate someone who comes from a farming background, that you may feel a little bit apprehensive about making a change from farming what is your traditional farming methods to something which is new. But please just ensure that you do consider it, is what I would say. Make sure that you evaluate it as part of your whole farm decision making, and hopefully we can see some of you plant some woodlands in the future. So diolch yn fawr. That's the presentation. Open to questions now. Hopefully I'll try and answer them as much as I can.
Diolch yn fawr, Johan. Thank you very much. Very valuable presentation there. We have had a few questions. If you want to send some more in, please do. And I'll kick off with the first one we've had. Just to say that the Gloucester Woodland Creation scheme is closing at the end of the month. I think it's the 30th of July. Johan, is it?
Yes, 30th or 31st. Yes, the end of the month. Yeah, so if that's for the expression of interest in the current window. Can you give a layman's explanation of how the carbon trading market works, Johan? Very, very simply, in its simplest form. Yeah, sure. So in its simplest form, you are growing trees, and the trees are sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, and therefore companies who have it could be Marks and Spencers, it could be Ryanair, it could be whoever, who have a carbon footprint, and these companies have social responsibility, potentially in the future maybe taxed as well, and are looking to offset their footprint. And one way of doing that is to purchase credits in lieu of the carbon that they're emitting. So in simple terms, they buy the carbon that your trees are sequestering because they don't have a woodland. Okay, diolch Johan. Another one here, question would be, the example you gave was a fairly large scale project. Yeah. What do you think would be a viable hectarage for a productive woodland? And can you give any future forecasts to value for the timber on a per hectare basis, or on that site specifically? I know it's a very big question, that, but I mean, with regard to yield and future prices, we don't know about, obviously, but can you just give an overview of that? Yeah. So in terms of future markets, in terms of what's viable, sorry, first part of the question, well, it really depends on what your expectations are in terms of output. So if someone was planting a woodland to fuel themselves, then small areas, couple of hectares would suffice. But if you're looking more mainstream timber markets, economies of scale will obviously kick in. And if you're looking at if you look at the real commercial woodlands out in the industry, the more commercial elements tend to be sort of 30 hectares plus. But I just think that you need to take it on a case-by-case basis. I think it all depends on your objectives, but yeah, it's. I think what you need to do is maybe need to come and speak to Till Hill or professional managers, and we can provide you with guidance in terms of what's most appropriate. In terms of productivity, the cycles of woodlands obviously depend on species, and the fastest growing species that we've got is Sitka spruce as a mainstream crop, and we'd be looking at rotations of between 30 and 40 years in the current cycles. Some of the, I would say, some of the woodlands we've seen of late that have been harvested got some extremely impressive growth rates. But other species, Douglas fir, Norway spruce, and so on, will obviously be longer cycles, and then broadleaves obviously a lot longer. So it depends what you've got, what you're planting, what your aims and objectives are. And in terms of productivity, well, values and everything, it changes. But if you were taking a sort of medium of maybe 450 tons per hectare, values will go up and down, and it's very difficult to predict. But we've seen some very high prices in the last year, and you can be looking at £30,000 a hectare. Some of those prices, but things change all the time. I expect timber to become more valuable in the future, but I'm crystal ball gazing by saying that.
Just very quickly, what happens after the 12 years of the scheme, Johan?
Yeah, and one of the things I should have said really is while single farm payment is with us, it's also paid on the area that is planted. So it's not just the annual £410 per hectare, but it's also the single farm payments that you will have been receiving. After the 12 years, your payments come to an end, and if you're not in a scheme, I think that was the wording. But in these current, it depends on the type of woodland again. Some of these fast growing species will be thinned at year 15, 16, 17. And therefore you're into the cycle of production and timber producing with some of these woodlands, and obviously with others, maybe early thinnings will produce, some firewood and so on. But in terms of the grants, it's a 12-year cycle.
And any sign of another window opening for Gloucester Woodland Creation after this one?
We haven't been told. I would just say that you need to keep your eye on the usual mechanisms of information. We would hope that there would be further windows, but that nothing's been announced as of yet. And this current window obviously finishes at the end of the month, and is still open currently.
We talked about revenue and grant revenue, but can you mention anything about maintenance costs per hectare and how this varies across the sites?
Yeah, this really starts with the establishment, and as I previously said, the importance of getting it right in the first place will save you an awful lot of money down the line. It's important you get your trees away quickly. get your establishment good in the first place, and then we normally be working on mortality rates of maybe around about 10% in the first year. In terms of maintenance costs, then obviously it's the weeding, and I suppose you'd need to budget maybe a couple £100 a hectare for weeding interventions, and then obviously beating up, replacing those trees depends on the percentage of mortality. But again, budget maybe £250 a hectare. But these are great. There are great variations in these costs in terms of, and lots of it stems back to the initial establishments.
Obviously, there's an issue with regard to when you're planning the scheme, etc., and the lead-in time to actually getting the trees onto site. So you need to ordering your trees fairly early from a tree nursery. Linked to that, are there any issues with regards to local provenance here in Wales with 303 and 304 areas with nurseries, or how are they readily available, or are there any issues with regards to sourcing them?
Tree supply generally is becoming difficult. It's something which needs to have some serious consideration. The earlier you get your order in, the better. Broadleaf trees are particularly sensitive to the market and do sell out very quickly. And the lead times for purchasing the trees, is potentially a problem. And as I've said before, we're able to source trees as a large forestry company, but as individuals, you may find it difficult to source the trees required. So you need to be careful when you're specifying which year you're going to plant, to ensure that you can deliver what you've signed for. So it's really important. And the local provenance, well, the tree nurseries are trying to grow what they perceive and what they forecast the market needs. But of course, in such uncertain times, it's difficult for them to commit to. They don't want to be overproducing, not being able to sell their trees, and therefore it's a fine balance. It's chicken and egg, really, in terms of getting the levels right. But we as a company are very successful in delivering what we say we can deliver. The demand in Scotland is having an impact as well, and further afield with all the tree planting that's taken place. So it's a really good question, and I think it's something which deserves a lot of consideration.
Yes, the next question: what is the mechanism of selling carbon through an agent? Is there a specific mechanism there, or what's the rule here in Wales?
So the system we work through, which is through the UK, is something called the Woodland Carbon Code, and there are more and more agents, I suppose, acting on behalf of landowners, forming group schemes. We've recently we're forming as a company, a group scheme to enable smaller schemes to group together to keep the costs of audit and so on down. The Woodland Carbon Code is what we work to, and there are agents out there. So it's probably worth have a look at their websites.
Okay. It's a very common issue here. The next question, and asked time and time again. The scheme's been submitted twice to plant trees, but have been refused both times because the score was high enough. With the emphasis on Welsh Government targets for tree planting, and all the evidence is there to reduce carbon emissions, etc. in the future, resilience against climate change, everything they put to that, and they're still refusing schemes. So, what is there any reason, specific reason for that, and what's the likelihood of improvements within this round for approved schemes, do you think?
Okay, so principally it comes down to money and demand, supply and demand. In the previous rounds of Gloucester, each windows had approximately about £1 million to spend. This current window, I'm glad to say, has £8 million to spend, and therefore you would expect the chances of getting a successful expression of interest through to be better. That said, there is more interest, but my advice to you is that you keep trying, keep putting it back in. We've got schemes which have been refused 3 or 4 times, still trying, and eventually I think things will happen. But really, it's down to Welsh Government to put the money into tree planting if they want to achieve their objectives of 2,000, 5,000 hectares per year, whatever you hear. Then they're going to have to put significant amount of money into it, and more money than they have. And if they want to deal with climate change, I plead on them to put more money into the scheme so that we can see more tree planting.
Yeah, I know this question I think relates to tree planting specifically, but I know for the woodland carbon code, it's very suitable. Is there a scope to create a cooperative of farmers to benefit from economies of scale?
Yes, and the only thing you're going to be wary of is the Gloucester scheme in terms of grant schemes. Obviously, relates to a business and those who have management control of the land. So whether you would need to go in as separate entities or whether you could form, you would probably need to, I suspect that you may have to go in separately, whether you could be able to do it as a cooperative in terms of the application process. We'd need to look at that. It depends on how it was set up. But in terms of the overall strategy of groups of farmers going in together to achieve greater benefits, then it's absolutely, yeah, it's a great idea. There are examples of the fferm project where farmers got together to plant trees, and that still serves the test of time. Landscape scale.
Diolch, Iwan. And next question, is there a concern that Sitka may be contributing to acidification of groundwaters which may affect rivers and fishing downstream from the hills? And what mitigation would you put against that?
I think the what's, as I previously mentioned, really in terms of forest design and planning these days, what's happening now is so much better than what's happened in the past, and we still carry that legacy with us. But rest assured, if you seek advice and plan the woodland correctly, and go through the right consultation process and evaluate the environmental aspects of your planting scheme, then you shouldn't be contributing. In fact, if anything, you should be improving the environment. And these woodlands do improve the environment, and there's no doubt that water quality can be improved with good design and buffers and so on.
Okay, and a couple of questions to go. Gloucester Woodland Creation, need land entitlements to apply for Gloucester Woodland Creation?
No, you don't need the entitlements to apply for the grant for planting. but you would need the entitlements going back to 2008 for the elements, which is the annual payments. So you would need to qualify for them. So if you don't have any entitlements, then you struggle. But on a case-by-case basis, you need to look at that. Speak to Welsh Government about your current situation, and see whether or not you're eligible or not.
Next question: how would you manage weeds on organic land? What would that methodology be for that?
So if the land to be planted is in a organic scheme, then it would have to come out to use chemicals, or the alternative would be obviously to use mechanical methods, which are a lot more expensive. So in our scenario, when I mentioned that it was an organic farm, we were able to take the areas that were to be planted out of the scheme in advance of the Glastir project.
We'll take the last question for now. I don't know if you've got a crystal ball, Iwan. Do you envisage grants for capital investments such as rides and access to ease maintenance and harvesting, etc., within new woodland and established woodland? Is there anything on the horizon you can tell us?
There's nothing on the horizon that I can see. Never say never. I think at a time where monies within governments are tight, I don't see that changing very soon. That said, we don't know what's going to come out of the new consultation of new, new agri-environmental type supports mechanisms. I think there's no doubt that woodland creation is going to be supported into the future, but my feeling is in the short term I don't see support for what we've seen in the past to create access and rides and improve existing woodlands, which is a shame really, because there's no doubt that it was proven that when those grants were available, the condition of woodlands within Wales did improve, did get better, and there are more managed woodlands, farm woodlands particularly. There are more managed woodlands as a result of those grants, and it did encourage farmers to take account of their woodlands, which previously had been neglected, and products, were being produced.
Iawn, diolch yn fawr, Iwan. Thank you very much for that. That's the last of the questions for now. You're very welcome to send any more in via email, and I'll send them on to Iwan, or if I can answer them myself. I hope you all enjoyed that. Gobeithio bod chi gyd wedi mwynhau webinar heno. Dwi'n meddwl bod chi wedi ffindio yn werthfawr. I hope you found it valuable. There's a lot of information there. So just want to thank Iwan very much for your presentation.